What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Guys, I checked out the 10 blackest states in the U.S. and now we're here with the 10 whitest states in the U.S. As I always say with these videos, this is not to, talk about race and, the differences. This is just really information because, most of this stuff, when I did the 10 blackest states, most of them I figured, I was thinking Atlanta, Georgia, Louisiana, type things like that. Those places that I'm pretty sure is, a good amount. But with the whitest states, I'm thinking more up north. I know more up north. I live in Texas, so pretty good amount. Texas could be on here, but I don't know. Then again, it just depends because Texas is big. So the numbers, I feel like just like the other states with the blackest, the number was it was a good number just because the state is a smaller state. Some of them not as big as when it comes to Texas, California, maybe Florida, some of the biggest. It's hard to kind of get those numbers at the most, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna be more up north, maybe the North Dakota, South Dakotas, and all those different things, Idaho, things like that. This I know, I'm sure. Iowa. But let's check it out and see. Let me see if I'm right on some of these.
A few months ago, I finally caved to public pressure. Normally, I avoid race-related videos on this channel, but I kept getting requests. I always avoided the subject because I just didn't want the comment section to be ablaze with racist comments. People pointed out that it's not just racists that want to know the demographics of a location. People of different races like to know where to live so they can be near types of restaurants they like, stores, and different festivals, things like that. To me, that argument made sense, so a few months back we did a video on the most Asian states in the US, and then later on we did the most Hispanic states. Today we are doing the whitest states. It's kind of only fair. We're going to look at the percentage of the population that is considered white. We'll also look at what European people settled in that area first, and this is all according to the U.S. Census. And now, a brief overview. Around 1565, the Spanish showed up in St. Augustine, Florida. Then, of course, the Mayflower showed up on November 11th, 1620. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stories with explorers and Russians in Alaska and all that other good stuff, but the two main things in the history book of North American colonization is the Mayflower and then the Spanish down in St. Augustine. Whatever the case may be or the story may be, white people took over, and what is now the United States has been predominantly white ever since. Today, we're going to look at 10 states whose percentages haven't changed much since the 1700s. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look.
Let's see.
Number 10, Nebraska.
Okay.
Nebraska is extremely white, and they start our list off by the 18th.
Why you had to say extremely? But no, I can see Nebraska. Yeah, I can see Nebraska. I never been there. I'm familiar. I know somebody that went to college there, actually from where I live, actually from my hometown. Guy played football there. This was in maybe the 80s and stuff, but he played at the University of Nebraska, so that's pretty cool. Black guy.
Nebraska's European immigrant population was at its peak, and about 25% of the state's residents were born in a foreign country. Danes, Swedes, Irish, Germans, and Czechs figured predominantly among the early newcomers to Nebraska. If you need more proof that Nebraska is extremely white, take this into consideration. The number one male name in Nebraska is Oliver, followed by Henry and Liam. Number 4 is Theodore. 88.1% of Nebraska's population is white.
Makes sense, but that's a large amount compared to when I did the blackest people. The numbers were between 20 and 40. We already in the 80. Are we gonna hit 100%?
Number 9, Montana. Coming in figure more up north. With the blonde hair, blue eyes crowd, you have Montana. Originally, Italians and Germans settled in Fergus and Park counties. Many Germans came from North Dakota and Canada, and a lot of the cattlemen that landed in Montana were mostly English and Scottish. Now, the dynamic back then was the English and the Scottish basically worked the cattle, but the owners were typically German. Now, they did have sheepmen. Sheepmen normally weren't okay back in the day. The cattle guys didn't really like them. But there were a lot of them in Montana, and they were from the British Isles. That's how Montana became the Montana we know today. 88.9% of Montana's population is white. Number 8, Utah. If you didn't know Utah was mostly white, you've never been in a Mormon temple. Mormons make up about 70% of the Utah population, and they have a history of being so white they think Malcolm X is a member of the X-Men. In the early days, Spanish explorers and French Canadian...
Malcolm X was a member of the X-Men.
Malcolm X is a member of the X-Men. In the early days, Spanish explorers and French Canadian, British, and Canadian fur traders had briefly stomped around Utah before 1847. But it was that year that the Mormon immigrants from Britain, Canada, Denmark, and Norway were part of the Mormon exodus from Illinois and became the first non-Native Americans to settle in the future Beehive state. 90.6% of Utah's population is considered white. Number 7, Iowa.
If you
didn't know Iowa's...
I figured Iowa, I had some classmates, they went to school in Iowa. I had a kid I just trained, he just got back from Iowa, at a JUCO. Shout out to that JUCO in Iowa. Forgot his name, but... I know it's cold.
Very white. Cold. You've never been to a county fair in Iowa. Before I start doing the research for this video, I honestly thought it was going to be number 1. I've been to Iowa a few times, and it is probably the whitest state I've ever seen. At least that was my opinion. The numbers don't match up with my opinion. So here they are at number 7. Back in the early days, like the 1840s, a majority of the settlers that came to Iowa came from the Scandinavian countries. Some were Dutch, German, Irish, Scots, and Welsh. New Englanders started showing up that same time, along with Quakers in 1941, and then the Mormons started showing up around 1846. Yes, Iowa has a good-sized population of Mormons as well. Nothing near what Utah has, but it's up there. These days, 90.6% of Iowa's population is considered white. Number 6, Wyoming. There were 6 groups that made up the early immigrant settlers of Wyoming. The British, the Germans, Italians, Basque, and the Greeks showed up here. In 1870, immigrants from the British Isles represented about 1/5 of Wyoming's territorial population.
I just realized another kid, he's actually from my hometown too. He actually just committed to play at the University of Wyoming. So that's pretty cool. I've never been to Wyoming. Like I said, I'm sure it's colder right about now.
And over 1/2 the foreign-born population. So the Brits came in strong. In the last few decades, Wyoming's become very popular with just about everyone. But these days, 92.5% of their population are identified as white. Number 5, Idaho. Idaho has quite the reputation for being very white. It has always been that way. In the late 19th and early 20th century, a large majority of the settlers were English, many before statehood. This seemed like a really great place to them because there wasn't much government. Back in those days, most of the English from jolly old England were being taxed to death, and a place with next to no government seemed like a great place to live. 93% of Idaho's population is identified as white. Number 4, New Hampshire. This is another state that should be no surprise to anyone that's ever been to...
I don't know too much about New Hampshire to know. I didn't know that.
New Hampshire. If you live there, you already know. I mean, we're talking about a state where the people consider Taco Bell diversity. New Hampshire being part of New England obviously goes back to the colonial days. And at the time, it was mostly British residents in the area that would eventually become New Hampshire. But in 1799, they started being joined there by a lot of Scottish and Irish immigrants. What's strange is for a long time, they had a lot of French Canadians living in New Hampshire, and sometimes you could find little bits and pieces of that culture in New Hampshire. They came down for the textile mills from Quebec, and a lot of them stayed back in the day. These days, 93.1% of New Hampshire's population is considered white. Number 3, West Virginia. West Virginia is kind of strange. I thought they would be a little bit higher as in the percentage because unlike most cities in the United States, West Virginia cities really don't have a lot of diversity. And if you look outside the cities and some of the rural areas, the mountains and the hollers especially,
didn't know that, but I'm definitely familiar with the Mountaineers of West Virginia, the University of West Virginia.
Actually, there is like zero diversity, so I'm actually a little surprised they're number 3 on this list. The settlement of present-day West Virginia began in the mid-1700s when Scottish, Irish, and German settlers from Pennsylvania came to the area that is now Berkeley and Greenbrier counties. The Scottish and Irish cultures really soaked into the West Virginia land. A lot of the folk music in this part of the country is heavy with Scottish and Irish folk influence. These days, 93.5% of West Virginia's population is identified as white. Number 2, Vermont. Remember everything I said about New Hampshire? Well, it's the same in Vermont. It always seems to be that way. I mean, they're right next to each other.
Yeah, I don't know too much about Vermont, but I can, like, maybe the smaller states.
And they always seem to show up really close on lists.
Vermont.
You look at their crime stats, you look at their school grades, their economies. They're always right next to each other on whatever stat we're looking at. Like New Hampshire, the place was settled with the English, the Irish, and the Scottish eventually, and they also had a fair share of people coming down from Quebec, the French Canadians. These days, 94.2% of Vermont's population is identified as white. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There's a link down below. There's also a link for Home and Money, which if you're moving to another state, another city, they're a great website to help you get in touch with a realtor in that area you're moving to. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Maine. Look at that. New England has 3 states in the top 4 on this list. And if you've ever been to New England, you probably are not surprised at all. And especially when it comes to Maine. If you look at Maine's largest city, which is Portland, first of all, they have less than 70,000 residents. The entire metro area has about 556,000. But if you look at the city of Portland, Maine, their white population is 91.27%. That is very high for a city. Granted, this isn't some urban sprawl or anything like that. It's still a city. If you take a look at the other Portland across the country in Oregon, their white population is about 76%. Side note, Oregon almost made this list. It comes in like number 14. Portland, Oregon's obviously a lot bigger, but still, it's an interesting comparison. The Pine Tree State has a population that is 94.4% white. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. If we do another one of these, what race, culture, religion should we do it about?
No, I think this is cool. This was definitely cool. But no, I guess there were some that I didn't get. I ain't gonna lie. I thought the South Dakotas and North Dakotas would be on there, but I guess maybe they were 11 and 12. I don't know. You know, maybe there's some information I need to look up myself, but definitely interesting. Like I said, it was mostly up north. New Hampshire, I didn't know much about New Hampshire and Vermont, but I see now, you know, I still don't know too much. I think I played against a guy in high school basketball, and I think he went to the University of New Hampshire. Yeah, I think so. Pretty sure he did. I think it was two people I played against in high school from Texas that went to New Hampshire. Texas got some good talent when it comes to basketball and football for sure. Texas got the talent. But all in all, this was good. Like I said, this ain't, you know, no discrimination, to talk negatively. But, you know, to fill you with some information, like I said, we might need to do a food one. We had the different types of food, best food in the states and something like that. But that's all I have. Y'all hit that subscribe button, send down those recommendations, give this video a thumbs up. Y'all be blessed, be the best, and be you. I'm out.